Hello dear students, we shall continue with Chapter 14, Outcomes of Democracy, page 177. So in the classroom we learn about assessments of the outcomes of democracy and also the advantages and disadvantages of democracy. So now we shall try to understand how successful is democracy. So when we discuss about democracy, about its disadvantages and advantages, we see that the performance of democracies is not very satisfactory, and they are genuinely is genuinely enthusiastic about holding regular elections, but elections are generally not fair, nor do they provide a fair chance to every citizen to elect a representative or get himself or herself elected. It is reasonable to expect a democratic regime to be attentive to the needs and demands of the people, but when it comes to democracy, the record on this count is not fair, as we see all over the world, as in Asia and Africa. Democracies often fall short of needs and demands of people and ignore them. It is also expected that a democratic regime is free of corruption. Unfortunately, corruption has become a way of life in democracy. Those with money and influence are often able to bully the law. They often dominate the law, and in India, hardly 20% of the fund meant for the poor reach them, and the rest is misappropriated or misused by the politicians and bureaucrats. But as far as corruption is concerned, when we compare democracy with non-democracy, we see that non-democracy is equally bad, if not sometimes it is worse than democracy, because in a non-democracy, they are less sensitive to the needs and demands of the people. In fact, democracies are relatively more sensitive to the needs and welfare of the citizens. A democratic government may be slow in decision making, less efficient, not always responsive or clean, but it is elected by the people themselves. Here in democracy, a leader is elected, a representative is elected by the people, unlike an authoritarian regime which is backed by military and enjoys support of a small segment of the ruling elite. The idea of democracy enjoys overwhelming support from the people all over the world, and we see that how people quest for democracy, that it led to the overthrow of monarchy in Nepal, and also Bhutan is slowly and steadily marching towards democracy. Also Myanmar is also marching towards democracy. All over the world, people believe that democracy is the best form of government because democracy's strength is people. And by nature, human beings like to be ruled as per their wish and desire, and this is only possible in a democracy where people elect their representatives to rule on their behalf. Now, accommodation of social diversity. Accommodation of social diversity and attainment of social harmony is one of the most reasonable and fairly expected outcomes of democracy. In India, there is a social harmony because of our constitution and successive governments which have made conscious effort to accommodate various tribal, caste and religious groups. Though sometimes caste and communal conflicts arises, but there is conditions and uniformity on the principles of accommodations of diversities. Democracies all over the world have been successful in dealing with social conflicts. Non-democracies have not been successful on this account. As a matter of fact, very nature of the non-democratic regimes is divide and rule, and they are supported by an elite minority population which is rich and powerful, and therefore non-democratic regimes turn a blind eye in blind eye to internal social differences because they thrive on this. Thus, we can definitely say that the ability to handle social divisions and tendency to split or break up is a definite advantage of democracies. In India, democracy is successful because it does not allow discrimination, and also it is against discrimination on the basis of birth, religion, region, caste, class, or gender. If we take the example of Sri Lanka is not a successful democracy simply because it allows such discrimination to exist and flourish. In fact, equality before law for all and provision of equal opportunities to all are hallmarks of an democratic polity. Now let us learn about dignity and freedom of citizens. We know that all human beings desire dignity and freedom. All of us want to be respected by our fellow beings. We also want freedom to do what we want to do. Recognition of these needs and desire is a characteristic of democracy. So democracy recognizes individuals' freedoms and dignity, and these principles has legal and moral backing in democracy. In Indian Constitution, it provides this by giving fundamental rights to all citizens, but in a non-democratic setup, the principles of individual freedom and dignity does not have legal and moral sanction. Passion for respect, dignity, and freedom are the basis of democracy. All democracies have recognized these principles, and on this count, a democratic form of government is superior to non-democratic governments. But we should also know that all democracies have recognized these principles, but this does not mean that in all democracy all citizens enjoy complete freedom and equality. Most societies have struggled to secure these rights. Universal Adult Franchise (UAF) is one of them. Women in most of the democracies are still fighting to secure equality, freedom, and dignity. Most of the societies are patriarchal society, where males dominated family society and national stage. So there is an awareness in democratic society that women must be given equal rights, freedom, and opportunity. And thus, recognition of these principles makes it easier for women to wage a struggle for equality and dignity. So we see that democracy has to face and overcome challenges continuously because of our fascination and deep faith in it as the ideal form of government. But more expectation breeds more complaints because all of them are not fulfilled. A public expression of dissatisfaction with democracy shows the success of democracy as it transforms people from the status of a subject into that of a citizens, and most of us believe that our votes make a lot of difference the way government is run. Thus, when it comes to dignity and freedom of citizens, it is democracy that recognizes these principles of individual freedom and dignity. Now we should learn about economic growth and development. So when it comes to economic growth, does democracy guarantee economic development? Not necessarily. Though democracy is expected to produce good governments, if we consider the rate of economic growth in all democracies and dictatorships, if we compare between the democracies and dictatorships between the year 1950 and 2000, we see that dictatorships have slightly higher rate of economic growth. Then the question is, should we prefer dictatorship for this very reason, since when it comes to economic growth, dictatorship have slightly higher rate of economic growth? But the answer is no, because democracy has many other positive outcomes, and it is difficult for democracy to achieve higher economic development. Economic development alone does not count much. There are also some other factors like reduction of socio-economic inequality and poverty which is also important because democracy aspires for maximum good to maximum number. Moreover, economic development depends on many other factors like population, global situation, international cooperation, economic priorities adopted by the countries, etc. So if we compare the economic growth between dictatorial and democratic countries, we see that dictatorial regimes have had a slightly better record of economic growth, but when one compares the record with poor countries, means the poor countries which follows dictatorial regimes, there is not much difference. And in democratic countries, the top 20% of people have much higher income than bottom 20% of population. Now let us look at reduction of inequality and poverty. Here, one of the reasonable expectations from democracy is that it should reduce economic disparities. All citizens should enjoy the benefit of economic development and lead a better life. All democracy provide political equality to citizens, but political equality does not guarantee or necessitate economic equality. In fact, the reverse is happening. We find growing economic inequalities in almost all democracy, as we have seen that a small number of people are very rich and have huge wealth and income, and the majority of population is poor. And what is alarming is that the rich are growing richer and the poor are getting poorer. And we see that democracy are not doing what they are most expected to do. They are not very successful in reducing economic inequalities. And we see that poverty in India, nearly 40% of the population still lives below the poverty line and is unable to get minimum basic necessities of life. And the poor constitute a large portion of our voters, and all parties seek to secure their votes to form government. Yet political parties who form the government at the center and in states does not successfully address the question of poverty. Of course, there are many causes of poverty, and in a country like India with over 1 billion population, it is a very difficult task. But poverty is the most noticeable stigma on democracies. And the situation in many countries in Asia and Africa is worse than India. More than half of the population in Bangladesh lives in poverty. And if we compare democracy with non-democracy in reduction of inequality of wealth and income, it is worse in non-democracy, but they are not expected to address these problems.